Okay, so I'm going to be talking today about the elements of God's character. And one of them elements is graces, but I will focus mainly on secondary graces. Big button. Okay. So what are secondary graces? Secondary graces act from the higher primary graces, suppressing the control of himself, God, by the selfish and social, like Brother Alex mentioned, selfish and social affections and their graces. Secondary graces do not have affection organs which, by exercising themselves directly, express such graces. Rather, these act through the higher graces, right? We're always talking about higher grace and lower grace and then secondary. And tertiary will be next. Laying hold of the lower affection organs and suppressing their efforts to control us. They cannot be permitted to control, but must act or not act as the higher primary graces dictate. Remember, everything comes from the higher, dictated downwards. If their action or non-action be proper for if one should allow a secondary grace to control what is in what the higher primary grace demands, that it should not act, wrong would result. So main thing here, secondary graces are not masters, not equals, but servants of the higher primary graces. So remember that. They're basically servants of the other graces. Is all they do is serve them graces. Now I'm going to, I go back. I got it. Got it. So this here I found in some of my dad's stuff that he had, obviously everyone knew my father, Kenneth, and he'd been in Bible study for a long time. So I found this in his stuff and I thought it was really good. So some of the lower primary, selfish lower primary graces that Brother Alex just talked about are listed here. So, and then this corresponding secondary grace is listed next to it. So self-esteem, one of the disgraces of self-esteem would be pride. The secondary graces would be humility. Approbativeness, ostentatiousness would be one of the disgraces. The secondary graces is going to be modesty. Peace or restfulness, he called it. One of the disgraces of peace would be laziness, but one of the secondary graces of that is activity. Vivaciousness, which really means love of life, is disgrace would be extreme self-preservation, and the secondary grace of that would be self-sacrificing. Brother Johnson listed as a different word, and we'll talk about that later. Cautiousness, that's another one of the selfish lower primary graces that Alex mentioned. Disgrace would be cowardness, and the secondary grace of that would be bravery. Secretiveness, the disgrace of that would be hypocrisy, and the secondary grace for that would be honesty. Providence, the disgrace for that would be covetousness, and the secondary graces would be liberality. And then combativeness, the great disgrace of combativeness would be anger, and the secondary grace from that would be long-suffering. And aggressiveness, disgrace for being aggressive would be rage, and secondary graces for that would be forbearance. And appetitiveness, a disgrace for being that would be gluttony, and the secondary grace associated with that would be temperance. Now that's the selfish lower primary graces, which I'm going to primarily focus on. This, like the social lower primary graces, like Alex referred to, sexlessness, conjugality, et cetera. The secondary graces are basically the opposite, except for sexlessness, which obviously would be chastity. So today I'm just going to focus mainly on the selfish lower primary and then the secondary graces associated with them. So the from our Epiphany series, God book, page 203, we understand there's 10 secondary graces. We're going to discuss each of them today. I'm going to break it down. I'm going to give you the dictionary version of the word, and then I'm going to give the version right out of the God book, so you guys can kind of see it. We're kind of short for time, so I'll do this quickly, but here are each of them as follows, and I'll go through each one in, like I said, in the interest of time. So modesty is my first one. So the definition of modesty is the quality of not being too proud or confident about yourself or your abilities, propriety in dress, speech, or conduct. So by modesty, we understand the quality whereby one exercises reticence, and instead of feeling sensitive at reproach and unpopularity, conducts himself unostentatiously and unabashedly before others. This definition shows the negative relation of modesty to approbativeness that Brother Alex talked about. And this proves the correctness of the definition. For proper modesty results from the higher primary graces suppressing the efforts of approbativeness to control. So approbativeness desires a good opinion of others, and when this can be exercised in harmony with the higher primary grace, it is proper and is thus a lower primary grace of approbativeness. Next, we'll talk about industriousness. So what does industrious mean? Constantly, regularly, or habitually active or occupied, diligent and industrious worker, are skillful or ingenious. So this quality, being a secondary grace, must result from the higher primary grace suppressing and controlling activity of some lower affection organ. The affection organ here concerned in the suppression of its control is love for ease. This affection organ properly exercised in its activities by divine wisdom, justice, love, and power manifests itself in restfulness and peace in God. And the suppression of its controllership produces industriousness. The disgrace that we would develop if we allowed the love of ease to control us is laziness, and there is no laziness in God. Long suffering, and we're very familiar with long suffering. So long suffering, it's a to forbearance. I got too far. Sorry. It's partly enduring lasting offense or hardship. So long suffering is the third of God's secondary graces. The word is almost self-explanatory. If asked for a definition of it, we might suggest the following. Long suffering is a calm and unresentful carriage of oneself amid naturally exasperating conditions. So it characterizes both the internal feelings and the external acts. It exercises itself amid untowards and disagreeable conditions. And these conditions naturally are oppositional or exasperating to their subjects. God's long suffering, being a secondary grace, cannot be permitted by him to control him, for only the higher primary graces have the office of such control. He therefore keeps his long suffering in perfect control. So next we are going to talk about forbearance. And forbearance is a refraining from the enforcement of something, such as a debt, right, or obligation that is due. And it's an act of forbearing or patience. So God's forbearance is the next of God's secondary attributes of character. The attribute of this attribute and long suffering are to the average mind the same, but there are differences between them. Long suffering is a quiet, unresentful carriage of oneself amid natural exasperating circumstances, whereas forbearance is a mild and unvindictive carriage of oneself amid naturally enraging circumstances. So in God, this implies that he, by his wisdom, justice, love, and power, amid naturally enraging circumstances, suppresses the controllership of destructiveness. Next, we will talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness is the next secondary attribute. We understand to mean be willing or able to forgive, allowing room for error or weakness. So by forgiveness, we understand the quality of heart and mind whereby one ceases to cherish displeasure or resentment and to inflict punishment for a wrong done to him, and in their place puts pleasure and friendliness towards the offender and remits any punishment that may be due for such wrong. So God's forgiveness is unchangeable. Some people forgive for a while and then become displeased, resentful, injurious over the wrongs they have forgave, but not Jehovah. He forgives forever. He remembers the forgiven sins and iniquities no more. Next, we're going to talk about courage. Courage is a mental or moral strength to venture, persevere, or withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. That's our next secondary attribute of God's character. The quality of heart and mind that faces dangers and difficulties with fortitude, with calmness, with firmness, and perseverance. The sphere of which it acts is in the dangerous and difficult. So God himself could never come into any circumstances in which he would personally come into danger, for he has and can have no personal danger. But his courage acts in relation to dangers and difficulties in which his servants and sons, his plans and works have had and do have. Next, we have candor. Candor is the unreserved, honest, and sincere expression or forthrightness. Freedom from prejudice or malice, fairness, mental or moral strength to venture and to persevere, and notwithstanding danger, fear, or difficulty. So God's candor is his next secondary attribute. And we define candor as a quality of heart and mind that frankly tells what should be told in the prevailing circumstances. To do so under some circumstances would result in evil to others, be the evil physical, mental, moral, or religious, while the telling of the needed truth will often prevent evil to the person or to others. Candor is therefore a quality that is more or less associated with telling unpleasant or uncomplimentary things. And the next one we'll talk about is liberty. Liberality is marked by generosity or open-handed. And that's the next of his character attributes. So we have already studied the lower primary graces and the providence and contract with which liberty stands. With aggravatedness is allowed to control, it makes one covetousness and miserable. But when wisdom, power, justice, and love suppress its effort to control, we become liberal. In other words, generous in our desire to see others prosper and bountiful, and in bestowing our possessions on others, especially on the needy. As in the case of every other quality, its supreme amplification of God is God. God is very liberal in his sentiments and acts. His benevolence make him rejoice in the prosperity of others. And the next one we're going to talk about is humility. What is humility? It's not proud or not haughty. It's not arrogant or assertive. Catch up there, sorry. A proper self-estimate is just what humility is. But to do this, we imagine one objecting. I thought that humility is a low self-estimate. We answer yes, with us. For with our many faults, lacks, and weaknesses, we do not amount to much. And the proper self-estimate is therefore a lonely self-estimate as long as we're imperfect. But if one were perfect, like God, it would be in harmony with humility to think of himself as perfect. The above consideration prove that God is not proud and conceited in his esteeming himself as supremely, incomparably perfect, and therefore worthy of his own self-confidence, self-satisfaction, and self-respect. And finally, we have impartiality. So impartiality means not partial or biased, treating or affecting all equally. Impartiality is a secondary grace because it results from the higher graces, like we talked about earlier, laying hold of and suppressing the control of certain lower affection organs. But it's different from other secondary graces. Impartiality works in the social affection organs. So we're in the social side, which is Brother Alex said, worldly side, which connects us with our fellow members of the same human or spiritual relations as ourselves. And it is within this sphere where the disgrace of partiality exercises itself. Thus, as against others, we are prone to exercise partiality towards the opposite sex, our spouses, parents, children, relatives, friends, associates, acquaintances, countrymen, religiousness, etc., all of whom are united with us by one or another social tie. But because God doesn't have them social ties, it's not part of his character. And in closing, I'm going to read a poem I thought from the last paragraph of the God book, Secondary Graces. High in the heavens, eternal God, thy godness in its full glory shines. Thy truth shall break through every cloud, that veil in darkness thy designs. Forever firm thy justice stands, as mountains their foundations keep. Wise are the wonders of thy hands, thy judgments are the mighty deep. Thy providence is kind and large, both man and beast thy bounties share. The whole creation is thy charge, but saints are thy peculiar care. My God, how excellent thy grace, whence all our hope and comfort springs. Mid earthly woes we sweetly rest under the shadow of thy wings. And may God add his blessing.